It's my pleasure to now introduce to you one of the most accomplished and fascinating founders in Europe. Torsten Reil is co-founder and co-CEO of Helsing, the largest defense unicorn in Europe. And if you guys read the news, they raised one of the largest rounds last week of 200 million, which is the largest record for Europe. Torsten was founder of Natural Motion, the video game development company, which he spun off while researching for his PhD at Oxford, and which he later sold to Zynga. Torsten is going to be chatting with Caroline Daniel, who is a journalist, political commentator, and partner at the BRUNSWICK Group. She spent 17 years at the Financial Times, including as the editor of the FT Weekend. Please include them. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So just a reference back to the FT, my first job at the FT was covering the first dot-com bubble back in '99. And I have to say the AI bubble feels pretty similar to that, but maybe with fewer parties. So there's obviously been a big commercial pile-on in terms of AI at the moment. Okay? Goldman Sachs last week forecast that 200 billion would be spent by 2025 on AI by different companies. And the 7 largest AI companies in the world have been responsible for the main part of the rise in the stock market in the US. So there's a lot of hype, trillion-dollar valuations, so you've still got a bit of a way to go, Torsten. But it comes at a time of massive geopolitical change and the challenges of running a business when you're thinking about the investment landscape changing hugely. Joe Biden has obviously just banned US investment in AI in China. So as you sort of sit here today and think about creating a defense AI company, let's take you back to 2021. And that was pretty prescient. It was a time when Ukraine obviously hadn't been invaded. It was a pretty challenging environment for defense. ESG funds were massively against it. Why did you decide to do that back then?
2021 felt like a completely different world. I have to say now, looking back, it's not that long ago that we started Helsing, just 2.5 years ago. And at the time, obviously, the Ukraine war hadn't happened yet. But what was becoming clear was that there was this big shift in, I guess, geopolitics. It was clear that China's attitude was changing. It was clear that Russia's attitude already had changed. I personally was quite worried and disappointed by, I guess, the West's reaction to the Crimea annexation. Obviously, there were some sanctions, but we didn't take it very, very seriously. That was one thing that happened. And the other thing in 2018 was the Google Project Maven walkout, which some of you may remember, where a number of employees at Google decided they didn't want themselves and also Google to work with the Department of Defense in the US. And my thinking at the time, this was 2018, 19, and then 20, was if these engineers, some of the best engineers in the world, don't want to work on this problem, who actually will? Because the issue quite clearly has been, and I think that's becoming even clearer now, that defense is becoming a software problem. But almost none of the software talent wanted to work in defense. And those were really the reasons behind it. And I honestly have to say, I think there was a degree of intellectual laziness on the part of people who wanted to live in free and open societies, be able to say what they want to say, be who they want to be, but they weren't prepared to protect those open societies. And that was the reason why we started Helsing in 21. At a different time, we were able to attract investment in Europe, I guess against the odds, or at least against the advice that we got from people.
So when you decided to start the company, what was the kind of landscape in terms of the VCs you started speaking to? How many people just said, no, we would never touch defense, never touch AI in defense? Lots of kind of concerns about sort of robot drones and autonomy at the time. What was the kind of reaction you were getting?
So we didn't bother to talk to that many European VCs, to be honest, because it was clear...
Sorry for everyone in the room.
Because it was clear quite quickly that European VCs, A, didn't have the conviction to invest in defense at the time, and B, also had LP agreements that made it hard for them, or at least they weren't prepared to interpret them in such a way that allowed them to invest in a company that was going to protect democracies. And so we didn't bother too much with VCs. We raised our seed round from individuals, from different family offices, from different funds. And then we're very lucky a few months later that we managed to raise just over 100 million euros from Daniel X Prima Materia fund, that really kind of got the company started.
So when you sat down with Shaq and with Daniel Ek, how did you pitch it to them? What was the kind of, and I know in the Daniel's sort of fund is all about creating European moonshots. So why did it matter that it had to be a kind of a European-backed company rather than sort of thinking about going to the US?
It's the same pitch that we have with all of our employees, with everyone in the company, with kind of all of us, all stakeholders. We feel a responsibility to help protect our democracies. And that includes creating capabilities that keeps our countries and societies secure and creates our borders secure.
So let's fast forward to Ukraine. Obviously, that investment looked pretty prescient. And obviously, last week, you're now Europe's biggest AI company at a valuation of 1.7 billion, which is pretty remarkable after just 2.5 years. You're doing work in Ukraine at the moment. Can you just give a sense of kind of what does defense AI mean? I mean, let's just kind of get away from the killer robots and killer drones. Can you just sort of unpack where the defense AI space is going and what new defense actually means and as an investment proposition?
So fundamentally, there are two things. The first one is that, as I was saying, defense has become a software problem, like pretty much everything else in the civilian world. That's also true for defense. It's just that a lot of stakeholders in defense haven't quite realized it, including some of the existing companies. And you can only really develop cutting-edge software if you are a software-only or software-first company. So the first thing to say is we're not a hardware company, we're a software company. That's all we do. And we try and hire and incentivize and nurture the best talent in the industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that AI, specifically as part of software, is actually the thing that unlocks incredible capabilities in defense. And we're not really talking about AI on drones with computer vision. It actually goes much deeper and it goes much bigger. So we announced a couple of months ago that we've been selected to provide the electronic warfare capabilities for the upgrade for the Eurofighter in Germany. So this is a big, expensive asset. It's one of the most important capabilities on the continent. And the capability gain that we are able to provide, without going into too much detail, by completely switching how it works, moving it towards deep learning and AI, is massive. We always talk about internally that the capability leap that we want to make is always at least 10x. And for us, this is not a marketing claim. This is the benchmark that we want to hit. Otherwise, we won't bother getting involved. And so there are huge opportunities for AI in the air, Eurofighter being one example, in the sea, on the seas, and subsurface as well, on land, and everywhere else as well. And so when we think about AI, we think about AI to connect and AI-enable big existing hardware and assets because they become much more powerful as a result. Because the reality is we actually don't have the money in our societies to spend a lot more money on existing or on new hardware and buying lots more of it. We actually have to make it much more capable with software.
So if you think about this as a sort of emblematic company about European sovereign capabilities, what other areas does Europe need to sort of develop this kind of sovereign capabilities that we don't have right now? Just want to give a sense of the
semiconductor. We have it I mean, we have the sovereignty issue pretty much everywhere. We've got it in semiconductors, clearly. We've got it in energy. Fusion is a good example. We've got it in quantum computing. We've got it in deep tech in general. But our view has been, and we had it in defense too, to be honest. The US has a number of next generation defense companies. There's Anduril, there's Shield AI, there's a bunch of others. But Europe had nothing. And in our conviction as founders, I should say we're 3 co-founders, was from the beginning that there's no point in complaining about this and analyzing it. If you want to do something about it, and this is the great thing of being a founder, you can actually start a company. You can build a team, you can build technology, and you can raise money. And we've never believed that this kind of company is hard to build in Europe. It isn't. It's all doable. The money is there, the team is there, and actually even the acceptance in society is there. And I guess my view is that's true for all the other areas where we have a sovereignty issue. It will be perfectly possible to build this company, a next generation semiconductor company, robotics company in Europe.
But I'm just going to counter that with a few sort of annoying facts. So we're sitting in the UK, and last year Rishi Sunak announced plans to invest 900 million in compute power in the UK because he realised that the UK was falling behind. It comes at a time when Amazon Web Services is just investing 30 billion in just one state in Virginia and its data centers. If you have a sort of asymmetry like that between both governments and the US big tech companies, how can it be really realistic for founders to kind of compete with that maths?
Well, when we started, we got a lot of pushback saying that you can start a company like this, an AI defense company in the US, because there's a big market, there's a big budget, it's one language, same politics, etc. It's impossible to do it in Europe because it's fragmented, the budgets are lower, you have to deal with different political stakeholders in every single country that you're in. And the answer is, who cares, right? You still can build a company. You have to deal with it differently. It actually brings with it advantages as well, because we have probably more direct access to the senior stakeholders in Europe compared to maybe our US equivalents. So you can turn some of these disadvantages into advantages. And so I think it's good, for example, that the UK is spending the 900 million on compute. I think it will be helpful. But it's also true that founders in this space, and in particular the German founders, will be able to build companies without that, and will be able to build unicorns and decacorns without that.
So I'm just going to, not that I want to be gloomy about Europe, I love Europe, obviously, even if the UK government didn't love Europe quite as much as me. If you look at the recent note came out this morning, in fact, from Charlie Muirhead at Cogex, and he noted that investors have spent 18 billion on generative AI since 2019, and that European startups have just got 800 million of that, which is about 5%. So what's still not happening in Europe? How can we explain why there's still this divide?
It's all down to founders. So there clearly haven't been enough founders being aggressive enough to build this kind of company. It's not down to the environment, it's not down to lack of funding, it's not down to political support, it's just founders.
So what are they not doing then? Not being ambitious? Are they not being ambitious enough?
I don't think so. I think founders in general in Europe can be much more ambitious. I think we have all the skills that we need. We have all the talent that we need. There is enough money in Europe as well, including enough growth capital. I think currently it's lack of ambition. And what I'm hoping is that there's going to be a number of deep tech companies in the next few years that actually show this is the benchmark, this is what we can achieve in Europe, and we can compete globally. I don't think there's anything that holds us back.
So just sort of looking at the sort of regulatory space, which obviously there's a huge obsession in AI around responsible AI and ethics. It's pretty challenging the defense space to be thinking about applying AI, on the battlefield. How do you square that and think through the ethics of AI in your own organization?
So we think a lot about ethics. Ethics has been part of the DNA of the company from the beginning. We work together with our team on our own regulation. How do we think about who we make our technology available to? How do we deal with edge cases? How do we make this as formalized as possible? But also, how do we think about autonomy, about humans in the loop, about edge cases around that too? And it's been extremely helpful to do this together with our staff. So we have workshops. We just had one a couple of weeks ago where we stress tested a particular set of regulations that we've built up internally. And the reality is that we do need to regulate the space of AI in general and also AI for defense. And there are obviously some attempts already. NATO has some. The EU has the EU AI Act, which obviously doesn't affect defense yet. But the reality is also that the companies that are closest to this are probably the ones that are best placed to help create that regulation. Because you don't want to over-regulate in such a way that you cover all kinds of things that are in practice irrelevant. But you also want to make sure that you do cover those things that are relevant. And so one example is, I think there's much too little talked about what does it actually mean to have a human in the loop. Almost everyone has agreed that you want to have a human in the loop for AI-based systems. But what we're finding is if you just have a human in the loop, and the human just ends up accepting everything the AI suggests, decisions that the AI suggests, it's not particularly effective. At the same time, if a human feels overwhelmed by all the information or doesn't have a way to query an AI's decision and just get a probability for a particular recommendation, that's not sufficient either. And I think too little time currently is spent on working with companies to be very precise about regulations and what it means to, for example, have a human in the loop.
So just take us in that room that you had with your employees and staff. I mean, how far when they come to your company do they just have to subscribe to the fact that your technology is going to be used in a battlefield situation? But what kind of arguments are you having in that room with your staff about your capabilities, who should use it, who you can sell to? How do you manage that kind of risk?
So first of all, I haven't had an interview with a potential candidate that didn't touch ethics. Like literally everyone wants to talk about it, and everyone, I think, feels strongly about it. And I've always found people ask extremely good questions. And those are the kind of people, certainly for us at Helsing, that we want in the company. We want people to be critical thinkers and push us and encourage all of us to think about these topics in a thoughtful manner, because you have to, and these are very complex topics. But we found that working together with people on this and actually making them part of this is crucial, because the thing that people are worried about, one of the first things that comes to mind is who do we work with, and what countries are we okay making our technology available to. And we focus on democracies. Like we make our technology available to democracies. And there's the Economist Democracy Index, and we certainly from the beginning right at the very beginning had a clear cutoff at a particular number. What was a pure democracy and what wasn't a democracy. And that is our overall guideline. But it actually happens, what happens to be the case is that things become more conflicted and complex at the edge cases. So I had a session with our people a few months ago where I asked, like, who here would just support pure democracies? And everyone raised their hand. And then I asked who would support Ukraine in the current conflict. And a lot of people raised their hand as well. But if you look at the Economist Democracy Index, Ukraine is currently classified not even as a flawed democracy, but as a hybrid model. And so this is an edge case that you then need to discuss and actually make a decision on. And the reality is that very often it is context dependent. Even though you have strong guidelines, you need to be thoughtful about edge cases.
So given your success so far, why isn't there more money coming into the European space to create more defense AI companies?
There is no lack of money. There are a lot of VCs. So what happened even with the European VC community, it swung from we're not doing this, and it's the iffy corner of investments, towards being very gung-ho about defense. And usually what people now do is they call it dual use, so that it doesn't sound like defense, but it's still defense most of the time. So the money is there. I think what isn't there is the founders that want to build a scalable company. I think that's the issue.
I just want to get back to sort of the European landscape and there's sort of regulation and what's happening. I mean, do you worry that actually Europe's doing the same thing again of just over-regulating AI and becoming a leader in regulation, not a leader in creating businesses?
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I think these things are independent, to be honest. I think that they're correlated, but they're not causal. The European focus on regulation may be a little bit overdone. But at the same time, that's not the reason why we don't have companies in this space. So the reason why, like, we had a lot of regulation in the internet, at least later on. That's not the regulation why there aren't big European internet companies.
So as you look at the broader debate, there's been a huge amount about pause AI and lots of kind of hand-waving about extinction threats. How helpful are they to sort of frame the conversation about the future of AI? And a good example is the AI Safety Summit that Rishi Sunak's running later this year. It's focusing on frontier risks rather than actually on Europe implementing AI at scale across its businesses. Do you think there's a kind of, it's been misdirected by the big tech companies to focus on extinction level concerns?
No, I don't think so. I think it's the right focus. It shouldn't be the only focus, but it isn't. So I think where governments are good is at thinking about regulation and reminding everyone that actually we are potentially playing with fire, which I, by the way, think we are.
In what way? What kind of fire are we playing with?
I think on the AGI side, there is enough evidence that we may be building something where we understand the mechanics of the system, the underlying mechanics, but we don't understand the emergent properties. And I think that's even true for some of the academic world. We are reaching levels of state change with some of the large language models that we have, where we clearly don't understand exactly what's going on. And I think there is a danger that we're building systems that go beyond a point in intelligence and reach a critical mass that goes beyond us. And that's uncharted territory. And I think it's wise to think about this as an issue. I don't think we should panic about it, but we should feel a pretty serious sense of urgency to think about how can we control it. And I think we will find ways of doing it, but I think we have to take it seriously.
So going back to the battlefield scenario, how far does that play out with the humans in the loop are overseeing a system which they may not have any understanding of how it's coming up with those conclusions or decisions? How do you square that concern you have as a person with the risks on a battlefield situation?
So first of all, it's probably important to say that we don't use LLMs or foundational models to make decisions or recommendations. And I would advise against that, certainly for the time being. I don't think the systems are there yet. We use different types of, we think, very advanced AI, which are pretty much entirely also deep learning based, but we wouldn't use LLMs. So I think that's pretty important. And what was the second part of the question?
About sort of how can you be a clever human in the loop when you're overseeing a black box?
So, in general, I think first of all, I think it's extremely desirable to have a human in the loop for ethical reasons. And so one of the things that is one of our main paradigms is that the human always needs in the loop, and we build the tools to do that. One of the realities that we are going to face in future conflicts is that our adversaries will not always have a human in the loop, because you sometimes gain advantages in terms of speed. And one of the specific issues is, and you can see this in Ukraine, and I think we have hands-on experience of this, the environment is almost always contested. So your airwaves are jammed, so there's very little information, certainly at times, that you can bring back to human decision makers, in particular from drone and related systems. But that means that we have a responsibility as companies to find ways of still having a human in the loop and work with the extremely limited and corrupted bandwidth that you have. That is possible. And then secondly, you have to create tools that also let a human inspect the AI pretty much always in real time. So you can be a human in the loop that actually makes the right decisions based on the information that you get given. But we do have to face a future where in real conflicts, our adversaries will not have a human in the loop. And they will, in some cases, have a time advantage on their side. And we have to essentially build technology that is leading so that we have the luxury to keep humans in the loop regardless.
Let's just sort of widen the lens a bit. You've been an angel investor as well and founded businesses before. So you look at the kind of broader AI landscape, and where would you put your money right now? What else is exciting you beyond the sort of defense space that you think is interesting, particularly in Europe?
So first of all, I mean, we're in the middle of a Cambrian explosion, obviously, in this space. As we've been in crypto to some extent as well, we're now with AI. The big difference between crypto and AI is that AI is real, and it will create real value, and it will be extremely disruptive for now many decades to come. But that also, it doesn't mean that there aren't companies right now that are copycats and that are jumping on the bandwagon. And I think that has to kind of shake out over the next 1 or 2 years. There are a lot of companies that build reasonably thin layers on top of ChatGPT and related systems that are probably going to find it difficult to survive because there's so little differentiation to everyone else. There is a huge amount of promise, I think, in biotech, and essentially turning biology into software. I'm a biologist originally, and I think we'll see a huge revolution in this. It may not be as fast as some people think, because it takes a while to get these systems deployed, working properly, and then eventually, obviously, getting licensed and getting approval for everything that's involved in this. I think so. That's hugely exciting. But one thing I think that's under invested in and overlooked is embodied AI specifically. I think there's a huge opportunity around robots, in particular around robots that interact with the real world in a way that just hasn't existed yet. We have obviously factory automation, but what we haven't got, which I find shocking, is agile, competent bipedal robots. If you look at the labor shortage that we're going to experience in the next 10 to 20 years, I'm surprised how few companies are still working in the bipedal robot sector. I think it's going to be massive. So I'm super excited about that.
So I want to go back to your biology, and why did you make the switch from having studied biology to then doing a course in AI?
Well, I was always interested in understanding biology as a process. So I was always more on the theoretical side rather than observing animals, to be honest, or plants. And so I did after my BA in biology, did a master's in AI to understand biological systems better, and then just spent pretty much all my time in my DPhil, which I then never finished, writing simulation systems, analyzing AI. And out of that came research into bipedal locomotion, which I then commercialized, and that's how I started Natural Motion, initially for visual effects for big Hollywood movies like Lord of the Rings and others.
But when you think about this sort of impact on biology and what's happening now with DeepMind's protein folding and other initiatives, what excites you personally, thinking back to your early days as a biologist, about what the potential of AI is right now, rather than just the gloom around it?
Well, I think the protein prediction side was amazing. I actually tried to enter CASP, one of the first CASP, which was the protein prediction competition in 1999. With a friend, but we failed miserably using neural networks to predict protein structures. And I think what DeepMind have done specifically, I think we owe them a huge amount of gratitude, because it's been an absolute breakthrough. And I think we're only seeing the beginnings right now of it. Obviously, you need to translate structure to function and do that in dynamic systems as well, rather than just static ones. But I think it will be revolutionary. And the same thing, by the way, happens right now around mRNA and around related molecules. the ability to predict protein structure and protein and molecule interactions with other molecules is massive.
So when you wake up and think about the sort of if you sort of had a vision, we're visionaries here, about the next 5 years, and what kind of developments you're going to see in the defense AI space, but more generally around AI. I mean, one thing which just excited me was around the application of AI to listening to animal language and being able to actually predict. There was a great speech at TED this year about predicting that an orca would someday do a TED talk, because the AI is developing so fast in terms of the analyzing human languages. I wonder if you can just give a sense of what's really surprising you, even as a technologist, about the pace of change right now?
So on the defense side, if we do our job well, and a couple of other companies in the US, I think we will be able to, over the next 5 years, is make Europe safer, and the equivalent US companies will do the same in the US. And I think there is actually a chance that if we hopefully have enough time, we will be able to avoid some of the large geopolitical conflicts that are currently on the horizon, and that is our biggest goal, by far, is to avoid additional conflicts in Europe and hopefully also contribute to avoiding a big conflict around Taiwan and China.
How much more needs to be invested in technologies like AI to allow that to happen?
Actually, so in the investment amount is not even the scary amount, because it'll be much cheaper than buying a new aircraft carrier, for example. It is much more, what's much more requirement is the commitment by governments to do this. And we're starting to see this happening. The contracts are coming, but more of that needs to happen. I'm less worried about the money, but people just need to get it in government.
So when you speak to governments, how underwhelmed are you by how much they understand what's happening with AI and procurement bodies that you have to deal with?
Reasonably underwhelmed, but it's improving, and it's improving pretty fast, at least in pockets. You have, for example, in the air domain, Eurofighter electronic warfare is one of the most protected and most difficult domains to penetrate. And the fact that the German government selected with our partner Saab quite a new company with a different approach, I think, is a big sign of hope as far as I'm concerned. And we're seeing this everywhere else as well, so it's happening. But there are also other parts of different forces where that isn't happening, to be fair.
I just want to get personal for a moment about just when you think about AI in your regular life, not in your defense life, what's the most extraordinary thing you've been playing around with and that you've actually done with it?
I use Midjourney a lot. I think Midjourney is impressive, and I'm sure that, so I'm not unusual. I'm sure lots of people are using it. There are now really impressive ways to synthesize languages and do that quickly. For content generation, my girlfriend is a film director, for example. That actually is disruptive and super interesting. I'm also particularly excited about music generation, because I used to produce a lot of music, and now I think quite quickly it's becoming obvious that that's not going to be necessary anymore, because that's going to be AI generated.
You've got a 5-year-old kid. When you think about his future in the sort of AI landscape, there was a great stat recently about that half students are using ChatGPT to do their examinations and study, and half the teachers think it's plagiarism. So as you think ahead for your kid, how do you imagine the landscape for him in terms of what he should be learning, how far should he be learning coding? What would be your advice for sort of the future of education around AI?
So I think about this differently now to how I would have thought about it about a year ago. To me, the core skills now of any child growing up are human interactions, and what it means to be a human to other humans. Because I think that will be by far the most important skill. Almost everything else will be commoditized by AI. Almost every cognitive task in the next 10 years will be commoditized by AI. And so as humans, I think we need to have the competence to understand what's going on, but we won't be able to outcompete the AI. And so careers in law, accounting, VC, actually even running companies, will be much more commoditized in 10 to 20 years' time than they are right now. But being a human to other people, being able to create human art, being able to care for other people, that won't be commoditized, and I think that will always have value.
Well, I think that's a great way to end, given that we're in a room of human-to-human contact, and we haven't yet been able to disrupt the events business entirely. Torsten, thank you very much indeed, and join me in thanking Torsten.
Thank you.